What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Jesse Bam Rodriguez, 15 wins and 0 losses, defending his WBC Super-Flyweight or Junior Bantamweight title against Srisaket Sor Rungvisai. 50 wins, 5 losses, and 1 draw. This is the first title defense for Bam Rodriguez after beating Carlos Cuadras on short notice. He was scheduled to fight, but he wasn't scheduled to fight Carlos Cuadras. Cuadras was supposed to be fighting Sri Sor Rungvisai for the vacant WBC Super-Flyweight title, but Rungvisai had to pull out and then enter Jesse Bam Rodriguez, the Robert Garcia trained Jesse Rodriguez. And Jesse Rodriguez was actually coming up a division. See, in his pretty young career, very young fighter, in fact, he's currently the youngest champion in boxing, only 22 years old. So he was basically knocking most of his opponents out, usually pretty early, down at flyweight. Flyweight is 112. So then he got called up on short notice to fight Cuadras for that vacant 115-pound title. And then he basically showed out, started off super hot, knocked Cuadras down in the 3rd round, ended up winning the title via unanimous decision to become the WBC 115-pound champion. And this is actually the same belt that used to be held by Sor Rungvisai when Sor Rungvisai first beat Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, and the first time they fought, it was pretty close, disputed. Majority decision wins. Some people thought that Chocolatito deserved the win. Others thought that Sor Rungvisai rightfully won that fight via decision. And then they ran it back about 6 months later in the same year. And then in the rematch between now champion Sor Rungvisai and Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, Sor Rungvisai blasted him out, knocked him out in the 4th round, to the point where a lot of people viewing that knockout thought that Chocolatito's career might have been on the ropes, if not over. It was that devastating a knockout where he was just flat on his back and just out. It was kind of bizarre to see Chocolatito in those types of dire straits. But yeah, Sor Rungvisai, very interesting career. He's actually a former Muay Thai fighter, had over 100 professional fights. Then he went to Japan to turn pro in boxing, ended up getting knocked out in his first 2 boxing fights. So he starts off his career 0-2 with 2 knockout losses, and then he fights a draw in his next fight, gets 1 win, and then loses another fight via unanimous decision. So think about that. At one point in Sor Rungvisai's career, he was 1-3-1, and then he just goes on an excellent winning streak, winning like 26 fights in a row. Then in 2014, he loses a technical decision to Carlos Cuadras. This one was stopped because of an accidental clash of heads. So then they went to the scorecards. Cuadras was up at the time, so he ends up winning that fight. And Sor Rungvisai, by the way, at that time was a WBC Super-Flyweight title holder. So he's actually a 2-time champion in this division. But he had lost that in the technical decision versus Carlos Cuadras, the same Carlos Cuadras, obviously, that Jesse Rodriguez just beat earlier this year for that vacant WBC Super-Flyweight title. But back in 2014, when Sor Rungvisai lost to Carlos Cuadras, he then won his next like 19-20 fights. So think about it. If you take away that, kind of bump in the road against Carlos Cuadras that again was stopped because of an accidental clash of heads in the 8th round, and you take out those 2 knockout losses to start Sor Rungvisai's career, I mean, even with those losses, he's had one hell of a career. He does a whole lot of winning. Again, he is 50-5. So after losing his belt to Cuadras for the first time in 2014, he again wins several fights, and then he finally gets another title shot against Chocolatito. And keep in mind, this is Chocolatito at least a couple divisions, like 3-4 divisions up from where he was at his absolute best. Chocolatito, by this point, was a several division champion. It just so happens, a lot of these super light weight classes, they kind of float under the radar. They don't get a lot of exposure. So fortunately for Chocolatito, eventually, by the time he was several divisions up from where he had started, he started to get opportunities fighting on like Triple G undercards on HBO. So this is around the the time that he starts getting elevated on a lot of people's pound for pound list. I think at some point he was hitting a lot of people's like number 2, number 3, even in some cases number 1. Chocolatito was that highly touted for a moment in time. And he's actually had a very, very distinguished career before he was on most people's radars. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you look at or assess Chocolatito's success at this super flyweight 115 pound division. That's why when some people talk about Chocolatito going up to fight like Nonito Donaire, I'm like, ugh, are you serious? But Sor Rungvisai was basically going in, entering the fight against, again, one of the top pound for pound fighters at the time, Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. Wins that super close, very disputed majority decision. It was like one of the fights of the year. Super action-packed, like a lot of Chocolatito fights are. And then again, in the rematch, he just blew Roman Gonzalez out with that devastating 4th round knockout. Sor Rungvisai, by the way, he's definitely one of the hardest punchers in this division. He is a proper knockout artist. Like, Jesse Rodriguez's name might be Bam, but it's going to be Sor Rungvisai, I believe, who's going to carry the heavier punch between these two. If you look at Jesse Rodriguez's knockout ratio, he's scored 10 knockouts out of his 15 wins. And again, that's one division below where he's going to be fighting Sor Rungvisai. Sor Rungvisai, on the other hand, out of his 50 wins, 43 have come via knockout. So super heavy-handed. And again, he blasted Chocolatito. Haven't seen anybody else do that to Roman Gonzalez. And then Sor Rungvisai defends his title against Juan Francisco Estrada, who is currently on some people's top 10 pound for pound today. He's not on mine, but he's like in my top 15. But Estrada, who after this had a very close, very controversial decision win against Chocolatito, was battling Sor Rungvisai in 2018 after those back-to-back Sor Rungvisai versus Chocolatito fights. Estrada loses to Sor Rungvisai via majority decision. So that was a close decision win. And by the way, this and Roman Gonzalez versus Estrada, how close that was, those are pretty much two of the reasons why I can't have Estrada necessarily in my top 10 at this time. I mean, it was only 2018 where he lost that majority decision to Sor Rungvisai. And then Sor Rungvisai defends his title again successfully for the next 2 fights and then fights a rematch with Juan Estrada. And this time, it's weird. This was April of 2019, and Sor Rungvisai enters this fight just looking totally flat, uninspired. I mean, he always looks very casual and poker face, doesn't show a ton of expression on his face. And I remember reading a lot of stuff around this time about him like getting a divorce and being in like a deep depression or something like that. But, you know, before this fight or the rematch versus Estrada, Sor Rungvisai was like meditating in his, locker room. And, on the call, Mannix and Sergio Martinez were saying that basically Sor Rungvisai was coming into this rematch against Estrada looking a little bit too disinterested and laid back. And I swear it took about half the fight for Sor Rungvisai to get anything going. Estrada was just boxing circles around Sor Rungvisai. It was not close. Like, you know how a lot of times you'll see somebody start taking off and winning some rounds, but the rounds are kind of disputed where they could still be considered swing rounds? These rounds that Estrada was banking against Sor Rungvisai in the rematch, these were not close rounds. This was Estrada looking like a sharp-shooting technician. This was Rungvisai looking like he was walking around in knee-high mud. He was looking that slow to where his corner between rounds was telling him, you've got to keep your feet active, because instead of like pushing the issue and launching into certain attacks like he normally does with his, pretty devastating punching power, he was just kind of sitting back on Estrada. And even when he would try to launch something, it was so slow that Estrada could take a step back and then counter punch effectively and then keep on circling laterally. So Sor Rungvisai was playing catch up for the first half, 2/3 of the fight. And not to mention, Sor Rungvisai, a southpaw, and this fight, by the way, is southpaw versus southpaw. Always a pretty interesting dynamic, right? Like, usually when you get a southpaw, it's against a righty, so you have to worry about head clashes. Like, I'm worried about head clashes in another fight taking place this same weekend between MJ Akhmadaliev and Ronnie Rios, because you have southpaw versus orthodox. But in this case, you got southpaw versus southpaw. But yeah, in this rematch, for some reason, against the orthodox Estrada, Sor Rungvisai was fighting him right-handed. It was really odd. And he was doing it for like majority of the fight. Like sometimes he would do a lot of switching. Like he would get hit with something or throw 1 or 2 punches and then switch back and then switch back. And then, so he was doing a ton of switching. It didn't look like effective switching. It kind of looked a little bit like desperation switching, but like in the 9th or 10th round, he finally settled back in to southpaw for the first time of this fight, settles into southpaw, and then what do you know? He has a lot more success in rounds 10 through 12 than he did in the first 9 rounds. So it was just puzzling, like, why was he fighting orthodox that whole time? Was it something that he was having difficulty with, that he thought a good strategic move would be to switch to orthodox? Because if you look through a lot of Sor Rungvisai's fights, yes, he does some switching, but he usually has like the vast majority of his success from his normal southpaw stance. So yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't understand how he was having so much difficulty getting started unless he just wasn't expecting Estrada to box the way that he was. To Estrada's credit, he was boxing with more intelligent movement and more of a sweet science style than he did when Estrada versus Rungvisai first took place, or should I say Rungvisai versus Estrada 1 took place. But in the rematch, Estrada moved around way better and he just boxed tremendously well against Sor Rungvisai and ended up winning a, clear, but it got closer with those last 3 rounds, but still a clear unanimous decision win. And he took Sor Rungvisai's WBC title. And again, this is April of 2019. And then since that, Sor Rungvisai's fought 3 more times, winning all 3. 2 of those 3 via knockout, and then the only unanimous decision win was against former flyweight title holder Amnat Ruenrong, also from Thailand. Sor Rungvisai from Thailand as well. But Ruenrong was pretty much at the tail end of his career. He did a lot of losing late in his career. So I can't make too much of that Sor Rungvisai's win over Ruenrong, nor can I make a whole lot out of his 2nd and 3rd round knockouts over Fajardo and Sithmorsang, because they aren't elite caliber fighters. And those are the fights that Sor Rungvisai is coming off of leading into his title challenge against Jesse Bam Rodriguez. So what do I expect between the young title holder, the young champ, Jesse Bam Rodriguez, and Srisaket Sor Rungvisai? Well, I expect Bam Rodriguez, who does, unlike Sor Rungvisai, get off the fast starts. I expect him to start off guns blazing. Not guns blazing in a reckless head over skis type of way. In fact, Jesse Bam Rodriguez, who again was knocking most of his opponents 1 weight class below this, knocking most of them out and knocking most of them out early. When he fought Quadras, the bigger guy, he was doing a lot of moving around the ring, but it was very effective moving. Like, it was brilliant. Like, this 3rd round knockdown that he scores on Quadras, he throws a punch to Quadras' I believe his body, or a jab somewhere like around his chest area. And then Quadras kind of ducks, but when he ducks, he kind of blinds himself by turtling up while he's ducking. At that same exact moment, Bam Rodriguez steps to the side and has like a totally unguarded uppercut against the very experienced Carlos Quadras. It was like quite a scene because, again, Bam Rodriguez was boxing circles around Quadras even before the knockdown. So couple that with the 3rd round knockdown, it's like, wow, that was truly Bam Rodriguez's coming out party. And so he took a chance going for the title 1 division up. So yes, he did kind of, straight up outclass Quadras, who also, to his credit, came on strong. The older fighter came on strong in the later rounds, made it a lot more competitive, made the scorecards look a little more competitive, even though it was still a unanimous decision win for Bam Rodriguez. Sor Rungvisai, I don't expect to have a fast start here. And, as bad as his legs were looking against Estrada just about 3 years ago, now Sor Rungvisai is, I believe, 35 years old. So it's like, can I expect his legs to be more active and better at 35 years old than they were at 32 years old? I can't really reliably expect that to happen. So I think that Jesse Bam Rodriguez is going to be able to take a whole bunch of angles and be able to outbox Sor Rungvisai for at least the early portion of this fight. Now, Bam Rodriguez is always going to have to be very concerned and very cognizant of Sor Rungvisai's punching power, because when Sor Rungvisai explodes, he's looking to take you out to the body and to the head. So Sor Rungvisai, I expect to lose the early rounds unless he scores some knockdown or knockout. Possible. I don't think it's probable, but it is possible. But I think that Sor Rungvisai is going to start coming on stronger in the middle rounds. Bam Rodriguez didn't fade against Cuadras, but he definitely had less movement in the middle to late rounds against Cuadras than he did in the first, we'll say, 5-6 rounds. So Bam Rodriguez is super young. Yes, he does know how to move laterally extremely well. At least he did against Cuadras, but he is human, and he did get slowed down as Cuadras was trying to launch sustained attacks to the body to slow the young lion down. So I think that Sor Rungvisai is going to be doing some of the same stuff in terms of knowing that you can't catch up with this guy in the early rounds. It's going to be like catching a butterfly with chopsticks. It's just going to be very difficult to get a beat, especially if Bam Rodriguez moves in the way that he was against Cuadras, and especially if Sor Rungvisai's legs look like they did in that rematch against Estrada. Now, if he does commit to a body attack and stay patient, don't let him just blast you out of there. Try to stand your ground if you're Sor Rungvisai. Come forward, jab to the body, and just try to pick your spots, but try to stay active. Keep an intelligent but sustained pressure while maybe keeping a high guard, and just do enough work to where you can make the fight a little bit more even keel, hopefully limiting Jesse Bam Rodriguez's movement in the middle rounds. But I think that even if he does this, I'm just not really feeling Sor Rungvisai's legs at this stage of his career. 35 years old at 115. This is one of the weight classes where the age tends to matter earlier than it does in some of the higher divisions, some of the bigger weight classes where you could get like a 40-year-old heavyweight champion. Or, I mean, Bernard Hopkins is an exception, not the rule, so bad example. But I mean, you've had Bernard Hopkins, you've had, Sergio Martinez, who was like a, late 30s, 40-ish year old champion as well. But yeah, 115 isn't the division to expect a ton of success as you're getting older. I mean, Roman Gonzalez, Chocolatito, is still 34 years old, 1 year younger than Sor Rungvisai. So again, I think that Sor Rungvisai has it's better than a puncher's chance because he's super durable. Like he hasn't gotten knocked out since his first, 2 fights in his whole professional career. Yes, there was a technical decision stoppage due to that head clash against Cuadras, but it's not like Sor Rungvisai was getting like dropped repeatedly and like the ref had to jump in and save him. It wasn't one of those types of losses. So Sor Rungvisai, very durable, hits so damn hard. I just don't think that the minute by minute action is going to be super impressive coming from Sor Rungvisai. I think that he's going to be losing like 2 to 2.5 minutes out of a lot of these rounds, at least some of these rounds, to where I think that there are going to be some rounds for Jesse Rodriguez that are going to be very clear Jesse Bam Rodriguez rounds. I think that there are going to be some swing rounds where it looks like, did Sor Rungvisai do enough to edge it? I don't know. So I think there's going to be some of that. But for every round that Sor Rungvisai doesn't get to Bam Rodriguez's body and maybe even hurt Bam Rodriguez, I see Rodriguez, again, developing a pretty sizable lead through the first 2/3 of the fight. And then Sor Rungvisai has to hope that he did enough work in those early to middle rounds to slow Bam Rodriguez down, to hopefully catch him, hurt him, drop him, really just change the tide, where you could hopefully like really damage and perhaps stop Bam Rodriguez. Because it's hard for me to picture Sor Rungvisai winning a decision here unless it turns out that Bam Rodriguez isn't really ready for this division and that he's better off at this point staying down at flyweight. But, Bam Rodriguez, super young. He's actually got a 1-inch height advantage, even though he's the one who, recently came up a division. He's got a 1-inch height advantage over Sor Rungvisai. But more than that, he's got like a 4-inch reach advantage. So we've got a 67-inch reach versus a 63-inch reach advantage to Bam Rodriguez. So the younger guy, an inch taller, has the far better legs at this point. Plus he's a southpaw and is a shade taller. I see a lot of things that are going to work to Sor Rungvisai's detriment, scorecards-wise. So I don't think Bam Rodriguez is going to stop Sor Rungvisai, but I do think that he's going to win a pretty sizable unanimous decision over Sor Rungvisai. So, again, anything could happen when you've got the power that Sor Rungvisai carries and he packs in his punch, but I think that the far more likely scenario is that Jesse Rodriguez is able to move super well to where Sor Rungvisai won't be able to get going until later on in the fight, and he's going to be getting beaten up, I think, just, tagged with pretty clear punches, is going to start making a rally in the middle, late part of the fight, but I don't think it's going to be enough to make up the difference, and I see Jesse Bam Rodriguez winning this one via unanimous decision and successfully defending his newly won WBC Super-Flyweight title. But yeah, let me know what you think about Bam Rodriguez versus Sor Rungvisai. If Bam Rodriguez wins this fight, would you rather him fight Chocolatito or Juan Estrada? Let me know in the comments. And who are you taking to win this fight between Bam and Sor Rungvisai, and how do you see them winning this one? Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.